Greg Swenson, you say you're proud of Donald Trump for what he's done on tariffs this week.
Yeah, because there's political risk in that, and it's difficult. You know, he could have just checked the box and gone along with the, the traditional global trading arrangement, the way it's been for generations. Continued to borrow money, fund the trade deficits with debt, with selling more treasuries, and have a nice GDP growth, have a nice economy, but it's unsustainable. So I think he's realized that this is a generational change, but it's absolutely necessary.
Can you explain to us, given the formula that we saw being used to calculate these tariffs, how is that reciprocal?
So, look, the president wants to do a few things here, wants to accomplish a few things. One is to reduce the trade deficits with a couple of the counterparties, notably China and the EU, Canada, Mexico. And so he's not doing this like in a punitive way, possibly with China, but with the EU and Canada and Mexico, it's not punitive. He just wants to reduce the trade deficits, again, because we can't afford to finance those anymore. So, yeah, is there something to say about reshoring and redeveloping, reindustrializing, bringing middle-class jobs back? Yes, definitely. And he'll get that done. But the way he wants to do it is use tariffs, but also consider non-tariff barriers. And I think that's what's important. So if you look at for example, the tariffs that the EU has on products versus the ones we have, that's probably a useful exercise. But it's also the non-tariff barriers as well.
You're saying the other protections that are...
Yeah. Yes, and I mean, we could go down the list of all, 56 countries or whatever it is and argue whether it's, fair or not. But generally speaking, the tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers to the U.S. are asymmetrical for now.
You think that America is paying for Europe's welfare states?
That's right, because we borrow, we have the biggest capital market in the world, biggest bond market in the world. So for generations, we were funding the trade deficits as well as providing for defense and security. And that was a generous thing to do, especially after World War II and during the Cold War. But it's unsustainable now.
Just explain to us, you're an investment banker.
Yeah.
How is crashing the global economy helping anyone?
Yeah, well, they're not crashing global economy. The markets were crashing. I fully admit that on Thursday, Friday. Today started off down, 5% in the U.S. market. I think it was even down more in the Asian markets, down 5%. Once the news started coming out, that the EU was going to be coming to the table and negotiating, even talking about zero tariffs, then the market rallied. So it was down 5% in the morning, finished down just under 1%. So I don't think crashing the economy is even remotely accurate now. I think it's going to be...
You think it's all going to be okay now?
Absolutely.
Do you think it's all going to be okay, Mairead?
No, I don't think it's going to be okay, because we're talking about something much deeper than statistics and trade. We're talking about relationships between partners, the European Union and the United States, over decades. It's been sundered. We have to agree to that. I'm delighted to hear you directly in the studio. And it's very hard to put that together again, but we need to, because we need to negotiate. I mean, I was very interested in the comments from the audience about caution. And I think we all feel that we certainly will not engage as the European Union in tit for tat. That is not how this will happen. On the other hand, we were open to sit around the table before the administration put in place, with the big billboard and all the razzmatazz. I don't think we needed a show to actually get the work done, but maybe showtime is what works in the United States. But it's more profound than that. This is impacting people in this audience, maybe not just now, but it will, people across Europe, in the United States, because you can't have that volatility in the marketplace without consequence. And we are seeing investment decisions being delayed. I mean, from my side, though, there will be opportunities, and we may get to that point. But I don't share your optimism. I don't fully think, and it's interesting you say about non-tariff barriers, the focus is on the tariffs. There's a bigger game at play here, and therefore...
They have a big issue with VAT as well, isn't that one of the big issues? Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. All of these, I mean, VAT is, this is what Europe, we levy VAT. It's a little bit extraterritorial, being told what you can or cannot do by a partner we had trust in. It's very, I mean, I'm interested in, do you think the trust can be rebuilt?
Yeah,
because
I think it can.
difficult at the moment.
I think there's two things to consider here. One is that the president, you know, he's disruptive, right? So he's going to be disruptive. He's going to suffer with a little market volatility. He thinks it's worth it.
And a little market volatility?
Yeah, it's an understatement. But I do think that the end game is to look after the people in the United States. I think ultimately will be good for the EU as well. But in terms of telling people, you know, or trying to advise other economies or other countries what to do, I don't think that's the case. They just don't want to pay for it. The American taxpayer is looking at their own bill and saying, why are we funding, 6-week holiday in France and free health care?
I mean, really, I think for the audience here,
Sure.
and for me who represented people in this country, your analysis is not our analysis. The idea that there is this view now, I mean, I haven't heard it from my American friends that they feel they're funding us. I think it's a bit disrespectful to our relationship.
No, we're funding the trade deficit.
Exactly. But on the other hand, there are ways to deal with that, including increasing taxes. But there are issues with trade. I accept, and I think all of us at the panel would say there are things we need to fix in our trading relationship, but that can be done through negotiation. And the big question, I think, for all of us, and I'm sure the audience have questions, how long do we have to have this game of how far will you push me and I push you before we get down to business? And I think we need to get down to business yesterday rather than tomorrow.
And I think that the president would agree with you, and he's getting down to business.
I just want to bring Minister Peter Burke into this. Doesn't one way or another in this engagement, doesn't he have us over a barrel?
No, he does not. Obviously, the EU marketplace is almost 500 million people, so it's a very significant bloc. It's one of the most highly integrated trading relationships on the planet. And when you look at, in the first instance, that the EU is responsible for 2/3 of all foreign direct investment into the US economy, that's very significant. And when you see the challenge that's presented to the United States as well, that their consumer pricing index now is at a 12-year low, they're going to potentially from July have to increase their debt ceiling. That's a very significant challenge right through Congress. Some reports are estimating that they could wipe off 5.9% of their GDP. That's again a significant challenge. And when you look at the American consumer and you go back to about 2021, 2022, you see a 20% price increase on inflation. So the citizen in the US is going to suffer very significantly because of these impositions. And that's the critical thing, potentially, that could come back to bite the administration.
I mean, it is very hard to predict what Donald Trump is going to do.
Absolutely,
we can only go by what he said, and what he said in the last few hours really is what you can go by. But the most recent thing he said about the EU and the relationship with the EU, he says there will be no talking and no negotiations unless they pay us a lot of money on a yearly basis, number one for present, but also for past, because they've taken a lot of our wealth.
Well, I think in the first instance you have to be fair. Like when you see a 39% tariff or a suggested tariff where he gives half and reciprocal, we need to say what's that 39% made up of? The UK charges VAT, the UK has digital regulation, it's not that long out of the EU, and yet it has 10%. So what's the variance there? We do not know at this point in time what the variance is, and that's why we need to get round the table and negotiate. But I would say when you look at 600 billion exports from the EU, and for tariffs to go from 7 billion a week ago to almost 80 billion today, that's a 10-fold increase. And the sad part of all of this is, the tearing up of the multilateral rules-based forum, where we had the WTO, we had resolution procedures there to try and sort out disputes between countries in a way that's respectful through the multilateral forum, but that hasn't been utilised. And the US over the last number of years really has blocked a lot of the resolution procedures through not appointing judges into the appeal courts, and now we're paying a huge price for all of that because it's very difficult to pick up the pieces. Miroslav Sescovic had a 2-hour engagement today with Howard Lutnick. I know the Taoiseach is going over during the week to talk to him, but it's going to be very difficult to move the dial. But we do need to see, a fair and balanced negotiation here.
The big problem here is there's obviously an obsession with trade balance and trade imbalance. And Ireland is actually a big problem for the EU in terms of that imbalance.
Well, it's not because we're not seeing the full picture. But I think we're not seeing the full picture, Katie. And this is the critical thing. We have a €150 billion trade deficit with the US when you include services. And for the integrated economy that we have, what that means is that there are many firms in our country that are paying the US economy huge payments for innovation, for royalty, for a huge amount of created innovation here in the States, and that's very significant, 150 billion euro of a deficit, and that's being missed all the time. Trade has to be looked at between goods and services and the integrated nature of a modern economy. We're looking back to 19th century economic theory, or before that, to try and sort out a modern, dynamic, integrated new economy.
Pearse Doherty, what did you make of what we're seeing, and indications all we have really of how the EU are going to respond, or the EU Commission are going to respond to the steel and aluminium tariffs?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the steel and aluminium tariffs were so last year. Like it's, you know, the EU are responding with a package that was supposed to be 26 billion of countermeasures. It's now going to be less than that because member states have said, if you do that, you're going to hurt our economy. But the real show is actually what's going to happen with the 400 billion of tariffs that are now applied, and where's the countermeasures. And the problem is if the EU issues countermeasures to that scale, it's going to hurt the Irish economy. It's going to hurt Irish jobs. It's going to put up prices for people at home who are already suffering through a cost of living crisis. And in all of this here, and everything that the European Union does, and indeed others, it needs to be about de-escalation. It needs to be about how do you get Trump and the administration round the table,
so
and that we can actually talk sense.
Like, is that an option? Just
no,
I think do a Taiwan on it.
I think, well, first of all, this is going to be resolved around the table. Like what you've commented in relation to what Trump is saying tonight, like some of that's just nonsense. Like, you know, that they have to pay us for things in the past. Like what
I see
Trump,
Greg is even nodding along.
Yeah, it is,
that.
and Greg is right. Trump is a disruptor. That is what he's trying to do. He's throwing all this out, and he, you know, to force people to cut deals with him at the end of the day. This is going to be solved around the table, and we have to look at this from an Irish point of view. Where Sinn Féin will come at this here is we need to be protecting Irish jobs, the livelihoods of Irish people. And yes, we're part of the European Union, and the European Union has, you know, it's not a small player in this here. They have a lot of weight and they have a lot of influence, but it's going to be solved around the table. So will countermeasures de-escalate it? I'm not sure. I think it's seriously risky at this stage, and we've seen what's happened in relation to China.
So would you be advocating for no countermeasures at all?
I think what you need to do is actually a bit of patience. Let's look at what's happening. Prices are going to go up in America. That's the first thing. Trump promised. His number one promise is he would reduce prices. He's about to break that dramatically. The second thing is the Senate has just broken ranks with Trump. Republicans broke ranks and voted against the tariffs in Canada. We've people on the streets. We've backers who backed Trump up until last week are now coming out and saying that what he is doing is economically damaging. And let's look at the markets, which is hitting pensions, which is hitting savings, which is hitting the way that they put their kids to college in America. So let's just take a breath here and not invite a counter retaliatory measure from Trump. So, this has to be about always getting people around the table. So what can we go to
the table with in terms of bargaining chips?
I think what you've seen from the European Union today, which they released, is they already had something on the table. They were already talking about zero tariffs in relation to certain areas in terms of manufacturing. There will be a deal cut, or please God. Now remember, during the first Trump administration, there was no deal. We had to wait until Biden got elected and the tariffs, both the EU tariffs and the Trump tariffs were put in place. They were a lot smaller than what we're potentially talking about here. And the thing Europe has to do is make sure that we do not inadvertently step into a trade war. We know that what Trump has done is reckless. We need to make sure that we don't do the same reckless behaviour by that type of countermeasures. When you're talking about 20 billion, you're able to target it in terms of certain sectors. If you're upping that to 400 billion, then you're in a completely different ballgame where you're really, really going to hurt Irish jobs, Irish consumers, and our economy.
Bertie Ahern, how would you play it?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, I take Greg's point. Donald Trump, since 1987, he took out ads, whole-page ads in the New York Times and several other papers. That's 38 years ago. And he stated that he thought America was being ruined because of the trading system, that the deficit, as you've said, Greg, was stopping low taxes. And he has never changed his view on that. But I think you have to accept that the essence of tariffs is a tax on the consumers. And, you know, you can say, well, the stock market doesn't matter, but 401k, which is the device to choose by all your pensioners, all the Joe and Mary soaps in the States. That's their pensions and tied up. And if you knock 15 billion off that, you know, it's hurting people really severely. Now, I take the point that if you try and trade, the deficits are not sustainable. And I accept that on the issue of defence, there was freeloading by the world. I don't think we argue about that. But the NATO summit is in June. And all the countries in NATO will be saying they're going to pay. So that really issue is off the table, as I see it. You know, if you look at the next big item, are you going to? You can't have it both ways, and I think, okay, I know the President is very good at having it 4 ways, not to mind 2, and we accept that too. I mean, he is a wheeler, he's a dealer, and you know, in some ways you admire some of his games, but it's serious stuff he's got into now. And I think you cannot say tariffs are going to pay all the money to write down your debt, and at the same time saying what you're trying to do is to stop imports and stop production, and that you're going to have a whole lot of jobs in America. And I mean, that you can't have it both ways. It's either it's a revenue earner or it's affecting the economy. And I think he's going to get unstuck on that. Now, listen, Katie, your question. Negotiation is the only way you can deal with this.
How do you think Ursula von der Leyen is handling it so
well,
far?
It would be a help if they could meet. I mean, it doesn't matter who's at fault at that, but I think, you know, I think...
You think she should have met him by now?
Well, I'm not going to blame her for that because I don't know the background. Some people say that the phone calls, some people didn't take the phone calls, but it doesn't matter. They need to meet. I mean, Europe, as the Minister said, is a huge player. Europe has a big say in the solution to this, and they have to meet. Now, I know the commissioners are meeting and those talks are going on, but ultimately I think Europe has to be seen to be in the room. You can't really negotiate any other way, and the sooner the better that happens. I think we will get to a solution.